Welcome everyone to Deep Drinks Podcast. My name is Dave, and today we have a really exciting episode. I've been looking forward to this episode for the longest time. Linda and I have been in talks for I don't know, like 6 months, maybe even longer. But it's been a long time coming, and I'm so excited to have this chat. So my guest today is the author of Pure, which is inside the evangelical movement that's shamed a generation of young women and how I broke free. She's done a TED Talk, and she's also the founder of Breaking Free Together, and which is a not-for-profit organization that helps people to release shame and claim their whole selves, as well as a life coach or a coach that helps people get through some of the trappings of religious trauma and purity culture. So with that said, I'd like to introduce my wonderful guest, Linda K. Klein. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to chat to you. I actually only saw your TED Talk, I think, when I first initially reached out. And then I've gone through your Audible version of the book, which is narrated by you fantastically. And I had to purchase a physical copy so I can stick all my little notes in the important sections. Because it's really good. It's a really good book. So my first question is, what are we drinking today?
We're drinking hot chocolate. Who doesn't love hot chocolate? Yeah. Were you able to get yourself some hot chocolate?
Yeah, I got some hot chocolate. You should see my booze cupboard, or my cupboard of like random, it's not all alcoholic, but like the random drinks that I have. I have like worm salts, which is like one of the guests was like, we're getting worm salts, which is like worm larvae mixed with salt and chili. And I was like a vegetarian at the time. I'm like, oh man, I'm eating worms, and it's wild. I've had some wild stuff.
That's next level. I was like, listen, it's morning for you, it's nighttime for me. What's a drink that will like allow us to both feel really comfy and cozy? So it's cold here. Yeah.
This one time I got up at 1 a.m. and drank shots of vodka with Pepe Julian Onzima from Uganda. And we're just and getting up, I tell you what, getting up at 1 a.m, or maybe it was like 2 a.m, but like having to wake up and then like half an hour later be doing shots of vodka was like, that was hard. That was like, I was like, ooh. But it's all for the cause. Your book took 12 years of interviews, right? You did 12 years of interviews before you started even writing it. And I'm curious, you must have had so much to go through, and you probably left a lot on the cutting room floor. Is there anything in hindsight that you look and you're like, man, I wish I left that one part in, that one section, or I wish that there's a story here that I got to share, but it just couldn't fit because of how you structured things? Is there anything like that in the process of cutting the book together?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are several things, but I think the thing that I feel the most strongly about is, so I was very conservative about what I left in, by which I mean to say, I feel like the book was already pushing a lot of people's expectations of what purity culture was and what kind of harm it could do. When it came out, we weren't talking about purity culture much at all, let alone it causing PTSD, right? And so I really wanted to make sure that the only things I was leaving in were things that I had seen over and over and over and over again among my interviewees. So if a trend had only come up a handful of times, I was like, okay, we're leaving it out, right? Because I don't know if it's really a significant trend, significant enough to make a real claim about. I wanted everything to be like solid. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so one thing that I left out, because I had only heard it a handful of times, but that was really curious and interesting, I have since heard so many more times, and it has actually become, I think, the crux and the kind of cornerstone of what I see healing as. So here's the story. Over and over again, when I was tagging my interviews, I kept seeing the phrase, I don't feel like a person, or I didn't feel like a person, or I didn't feel like a person until, right? I kept seeing that phrase come up. And so I started tagging when it was coming up. And then in the tagging process, I saw that in a lot of those same people's stories, there was another time when they said, I started to feel like a person for the first time when, right? Or, something along those lines of like, for the first time, I felt like a person, right? And so I was going through and being like, what is going on that people feel like they're not people, and then that they regain a sense of personhood, right? And what I was finding in the interviews, this is all pre-book, right, was that there was this theme where when people felt like they had handed over their choices to other people, they felt removed from humanity. So it could be something as little as somebody who didn't feel like they had the right to make any choices. You know, if you and I are talking and you're telling a story and I have to go to the bathroom, I'm not allowed to get up and go to the bathroom. I have to let you finish your story and then wait until there's not an awkward pause for me to actually be like, okay, I'm just going to step away. And, you know, if somebody asks me to go hang out, I have to say yes because they want to, even if I'm exhausted, right? So there are little ways like that that made people feel like everyone else got to have their wants. Everyone else got to have their desires. Everyone else got to have their idiosyncrasies. Everyone else got to have their choices, including their inappropriate, you know, behavior, right? But not me. I have to do what's right for everyone else. For some people, it was bigger things like, for example, you know, one woman talked about how she wanted to be a pastor, but she was told that women can't preach, women can't be pastors. And so she said, okay, I can't do this. This is not for me. You know, other people get to choose the ministry. Other people get to choose their vocations, their careers, but not me. I'm not a person. Right. And it's when they start to actually make choices for themselves, as little as, sorry, I'm just going to stop you for a minute. I'm going to run to the bathroom, right? And as big as I'm going to divinity school, right? That people started to feel a sense of personhood. And I think that's really important because I think that purity culture certainly is about sex and it is about gender, but it is so much more about purity culture, and the larger culture that engenders purity culture, right, is so much more about removing you as a human being from your selfhood and negating your selfhood, right? And sort of pausing your development, really, right? Your individual development at a stage where you are still looking to others for how to make your decisions, right? You know, so for example, you know, we learn that you are given a particular community. This is your community. These are your people. They're the right ones. They're the good ones. They have all the answers. If they approve of you, you're in, you're good. You have all the answers. If they don't, you're out, right? So your first thing you have to do is figure out who your community is, make all the right choices according to them, right? And then become the person who makes all those choices. Have the feelings of the person who would make those choices. Have the thoughts of the person who would make those choices. Have the bodily experiences of someone who would make those choices, right? So essentially, you are shaping yourself. You're manipulating your self-development, you know, to fit other people's expectations, right? So the reason this feels so important to me is because I have increasingly found that the healing that we can have post purity culture has to do with kind of taking these three questions and putting them in the right order. So starting with, who am I? What do I think? What do I feel? What is my body experiencing? You know, what are my wants? What are the, you know, aspects of me that are complex but exist, right, et cetera. And then where am I going, right? You know, what choices do I want to make, et cetera. And then who will go with me? A question that we can answer, right? A question that only other people can answer. So I think that in many ways, the church taught us to ask those same three questions in the opposite order, which is what divorces us from our sense of even our humanity. So it's actually not a small thing, right? Sometimes I think people feel like, oh, purity culture, you know, blah, 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 y'all are fine, right? No, you know, in many cases, we become so separated from our humanity, right? From our own thoughts, our own feelings, et cetera, that we don't even feel like we're people. And that's a very fundamental thing to say.
Yeah. Wow, that's such a profound answer. I something that stood out to me when I was reading the last, I think it's the second last chapter of your book, Going Home. Is that the second last chapter, or it's in there?
I think third to last, but yeah, you're
third to
close.
last.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I had the Audible version. It's all kind of blurry. But
right, yeah.
So shortly after you were having you talk about this conversation you had with your mother about.
I'm so sorry, my dog is in the background.
That's okay.
He really wants to come in here.
That's okay. That's okay.
Please.
So you're having a conversation with your mother, and she was worried that you might have been a tool of the devil because of questioning these things. And then you kind of asked her some deep questions around, like, when do you feel the most free, or like the most, what was the exact phrase you used? It was something to do around
I don't
like,
know, alive or free or something like
yeah,
that.
something
Yeah.
like that.
Hey, while you're looking, can
Yeah,
I let my dog in?
yeah, sure,
He'll
absolutely.
be quiet. He'll be so much
Yeah,
better. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry. All right, we're back.
Awesome. What type of dog do you have?
We don't know. He's a mix of adorability.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. We have a rescue beagle, and he's cheeky as ever.
Yeah.
I can't find the exact back part, but you asked essentially, like, when do you feel like the most alive, the most free? And she said,
Yeah.
I don't answer questions like that. And then she eventually said, with God. And it made me kind of question the idea of, like, is that the moment when not just your mother, but like many people around the world, they feel that they can just let go of these expectations about who they are as a female, who they are as their position in society. They can let go of all of that, and they can have that moment of quietness where they can let all those walls down. And maybe that's like really symbolic for how someone engages with their faith. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting because I know a lot of secular strategies for doing the exact same thing. As a coach, I work with people who are religious and people who are not religious. And I do sort of regardless, but sometimes I'll frame it a little bit differently depending on who it is, practices of connecting to yourself and connecting to that core voice within you and that core sense of yourself. And I feel like that's a lot of what my mom does when she goes to the side of the bed and sits down in this little corner between the bed and the window, just this like little sliver of space where she can be totally alone. There's nowhere in our house that is totally my mom's, right? It's all shared space. My dad has an entire office, right? But my mom has nothing that is hers, right? Which I also think is part of this personhood, kind of frame. But she finds this little sliver of space that is unused, right? Where she can sit down on the floor and tuck up her knees because it's not big enough for her to stretch them out and just be for a little while. And for her, that's, being with God, and it's, accepting what's going on in the moment and trusting that that God will solve it, or that God is telling her everything is okay already, right? But so often, very similar practices, in meditation and etc., right? These sorts of like dropping away, right, all the expectations of the world, like you said, and just saying, hey, it's just me and me, or just me and God, or just me and, however you understand this connection that is larger than you, even if it is just you, right? Like me and my own wisdom, right? Me and my true self, right? And I think it is really powerful.
Something I've noticed online is the difference between, only slightly, by the way, but that I've noticed this, but the difference between how women are treated and how men are treated, especially in online spaces. And I've said this a couple of times, but for the first like 85 episodes of Deep Drinks, I pretty much wore the exact same thing. Initially, I wore the same thing because I thought it looked good initially, and then I was like, I'm just going to keep it in my cupboard. And then I was like, I wonder how long I can go wearing this exact same thing before anyone comments. No one ever did. Like 85 episodes, and it was just like, people wondered. Like, I've had some people say they wondered, but they're like, yeah, he just wears the same thing. But like, so many of my female content creator friends are like, no, I can't wear the same thing twice. Like, I'll get like the whole community be like, what are you doing? What, like, you wore that last week? and I just find it so
So
interesting
funny.
the difference between how men and women are treated. And so your book really goes into
Wait, can I comment on that? Can I comment on that?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So you want to hear how I chose what to wear? I was going to wear my pink shirt because I feel the best in my pink shirt. And then I was like, oh man, I've worn the pink shirt in a lot of interviews. You know, how many people are going to see that I wore it in those interviews as well as this one? Like, how many times can you get away with wearing the pink shirt? And then I was like, oh, and then I was like, you know what? And I'm going to be in the room with kind of rose-colored walls. And that's already kind of a feminine color. And are people really going to respect me if I'm in a feminine colored room and I'm wearing a feminine colored shirt? Nah, probably not. This is deep drinks. This sounds like philosophical deep stuff. We're going to have to put on a different shirt. So then I was like, all right, I'm going to wear this brick colored, brick, is not my favorite color, but it like connotes a groundedness, right? And a like traditionalism that I was like, yes, I shall call forth this for the interview. So anyway, I couldn't help but respond to that.
Funny.
But yeah, 100%, the treatment is very different. And you have to take in, yeah. Go ahead.
I got up and I was like, which shirts are clean? I looked at it and I was just like, oh yeah. I was like ally, and I was like, that kind of fits. Like it's LGBT friendly. And I was like, oh, this would be good. And I just chucked it on. Like it was just like, what's clean?
Right.
Like that was my big thought process.
Right. But my whole thought process was like not only on over representation of a shirt, but also what as a woman will I be respected in and what won't I be, right? So yeah, it's a whole complex.
That's so amazing. But your book covers essentially the female perspective of purity culture, which is huge. But did you get any? Do you have conversations with any men that had experience, or have you got any stories from how purity culture has affected men in any ways? I've got a ton I can tell you about, but obviously your book focuses mainly on how it affects women.
Yeah, sure. I'll answer the question, and I'd love to hear some stories because, first thing I'll say is that it is so much harder, I think, for men to find stories, which is one of the reasons that I think would be really great for you to share. You have an extra, listen, purity culture has been real rough on women. There's no doubt about it. But one thing that we are allowed as women is our emotions and our pain. And we are also allowed to communicate and to talk, right? And that's built into our gender expectations. And those are assets in our recovery process, right? We might not know how to feel our real emotions because we've been manipulating our emotions to fit into a particular set of expectations for a long time. But we do feel, and we might not be able to feel our full range of emotions, right? Such as anger, et cetera. There's a lot of taboos, but we are allowed to have emotional expressions of pain, and we are allowed to talk about things, right? And so I think you find the stories of women to be much more prevalent, right? Whereas men, because purity culture ultimately teaches gender expectations, and the sexual expectations fit beneath the gender expectations, right? So men are taught you have to be these hyper stereotypical masculine men. And one of the aspects of that is no feelings and no communication, right? If you have a problem, you don't talk about it. You deal with it yourself. You be a strong man who can handle it without having a conversation, right? And so I think that to get past that barrier without those tools, or to have to find those tools and then learn how to use them, et cetera, it's just a longer road, I think. So yeah, I have interviewed a bunch of men, and I've also, worked with a bunch of men in coaching, et cetera. And I find that it's a similar, but also quite different experience, girls and boys. And I'm using like binary language right now, which would be the language of the church, right? Girls and boys are separated for these teachings, as you know, and particularly around gender and sexuality teachings. And the teachings are different, or they're the same, but they're both girls and boys learn that that girls and women are responsible for making sure that men don't have sexual thoughts, and both girls and boys learn that men are monsters who can't control their sexual thoughts and choices and actions, and therefore men must. So we're learning the same messages about ourselves and the other one, but they're like very different messages, right?
Oh yeah.
So I have a lot of different stories that I decided not to represent in the book because it just felt like a whole other world that couldn't wrap my head fully around. But yeah, so tell me some of your stories, and I'd love to talk.
Well, I remember he's now my boss, but I remember when I was a youth pastor, I ran on a small group night. We had a bunch of young teens come in, 13 kind of onwards, and we talked about, we separated the men and the boys and the girls, and we talked about like purity culture, sex, and all that stuff. I don't know fully what the girls were taught, but we were taught, like what I taught the guys was straight away. I was just like, who watches porn? Who masturbates? Like to these like teens, and it was very much the messaging that I was giving off, and the messaging that I believed at the time was that you've got to hold back your urges. You're essentially like you're a predator. Essentially, like you don't know it, but you're a predator, and if you keep letting these things grow, they'll grow out of control. And we essentially built these. Now, I didn't do this with the teens, but personally, between me and some zealous kind of Christians, we created these like anti-masturbation clubs between us, where we would message each other whenever we felt the urge to masturbate, and then the other person would pray, hey, and so it was this weird thing of like, you'd get we're 20, 21, we're young, hormones are going crazy, and we're celibate, and we're not masturbating, not looking at porn. And then by the end of the week, you're like, at the start of the week, it's all fine, and there's no text messages coming through. At the end of the week, it's like, ding, everyone's phones are going off, everyone's praying all the time because you've just let the dudes are super horny. Then they go to church, and Mary wears a dress that's like this, showing this much of kneecap, and the guy's like, I can't control it. So it perpetuates this
interesting.
So it perpetuates this like thing where it's like, you caused me to stumble. I had female leaders who said that they were told by people, you've made me stumble, like you were, and I was like, what? That was weird for me. Like, you shouldn't be going up to girls and saying, you made me stumble when you wore that. That's not okay. But yeah, you were very much taught that you were essentially a predator. And we were watching all these like, every young man's battle and stuff. And they interviewed like Ted Bundy, who was like, I was a serial killer and it all started with porn. And you're like, okay, like,
I had not heard about the interview with Ted Bundy.
Yeah, it's crazy. He's like, without question, every single person
not just
here started
a sexually depraved person, but a serial killer.
Yeah, and they interview like this guy is like, I started out by looking at my dad's dirty magazines, and now I'm a prostitute. And you're like, what? He's like, now I sell my body to men. And you're like, but how did what? And it was this, or this other person discovered that they had quote unquote turned gay from looking at too much porn, and it was just like, it's this bizarre, like, you've got this demon thing inside you that you're trapped and you need to like be careful about. And that was the perspective from the male perspective that we were taught. But some personal experiences I've had, like you mentioned people in your book having panic attacks or vomiting and from panic attacks and things like that. I had that exact experience. I totally forgot about it until I read your book, where the first time, and this is before I was super involved in church, but this kind of just was, I guess, my own standards. But like the first time my high school girlfriend and I decided to try, like, I guess, hand and mouth stuff, I all of a sudden just felt sick and got up and ran outside and vomited in the garden. And then I was like, that was weird. And then the next time, it obviously didn't happen, but that night, but the next time we tried, the same thing. I'm like, what's going on? So every time we would get right to the point of having some sexy time, I would freak out and have to go vomit. And it was like a classic. And even after we did engage in that kind of stuff, I remember feeling this intense amount of guilt, or not guilt, but like something had changed or something was broken or something was wrong. And I talk to my, secular friends about this now, and they're like, I never experienced that at all. Like, it was a great time. Like, everyone was like hooking up in high school, and it was just fun.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there wasn't like this doom and gloom around it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the two kind of things, the sort of monstrousness and then this shame that kind of is physicalized. Yeah. I'm just holding them both. Yeah. So the monstrousness, the fear that you are a monster, right? And that therefore you have to regulate it, because if you let anything out, then the Ted Bundy will come out of you or what have you, is one of the biggest things I hear among men. And just to give you a little sense of, you were talking about, what was happening with the accountability circles around masturbation, and then you know how that ties to the stumbling block stuff with what women were wearing. Well, let me tie this now to this monstrousness, to what was happening among women and girls. So many of my clients right now are struggling with a fear of men and a feeling that men are inherently monsters, and that they have something in them that is so dangerous that, some of my clients struggle with working with men. Some of them struggle with like, meeting the fathers of friends, right? There's so much of this teaching that that men have this uncontrollable sort of like horrific, beast inside of them that's going to destroy everything in their wake, that not only, has affected many men by making them, believe that about themselves, which is an awful thing to believe about yourself, right? But it's also something that many women believe, right? That creates, as you can imagine, huge issues, not just in their romantic relationships, but in all kinds of ways of functioning in the world.
Yeah.
And then, go ahead.
Go. What were we saying?
I was going to say, and then the throwing up one. Yeah. I mean, you're just so not the only one. And I think this, but the kind of like physical reaction to sexuality is so common, and panic attacks, throwing up, breaking down in tears, eczema, coming out, all kinds of things, right? It's just such a common manifestation of that shame.
I really want to ask you about your journey, but I want to preface it with another story, if that's okay, because it ties directly into your story. This isn't David's hour of like, well, it could be, but we're not going to do that. So the first time my wife and I started, my now wife and I started hooking up was when we're both kind of backsliding from Christianity, I guess you could say. And then we had a break, and then when we both, and we broke up, and then we kind of found each other again as we were diving more into our faith, and now we're married. But at the time, I was working at Litwa, so I was working a night shift, and mind you, we're both in these hard spots, and I was putting away stuff, and we were texting, and we were kind of sexting a little bit on over the phone. And it got to about Amy had stayed up all night. We just was texting like all night as I'm like working. I'll put my phone text, and at 3 a.m, I decided I'm going home sick, and I'm going to go pick up Amy, and we're gonna like hook up, like, and we didn't have sex or anything like that. But we all the stuff we were messaging, we were definitely not going to have sex, but we might have done other stuff. You know what I mean? So I get home, I drive home. I've just moved in with a new Christian lady who's extremely religious. And like extremely like told me to throw out my video games that had any witchcraft in them and things like that, like very Kenneth Copeland kind of esque type of Christianity. And I went in, had a shower at like 3 a.m. I get out and it's flooded. I can't get out of our house. The road that we're on would always flood, and I couldn't get out. But I was so desperate to go pick up Amy that I drove up the street. And in Australia, there are these like footpaths that go in between streets sometimes. And I drove up there. My car started getting bogged. It's pouring rain. I'm flicking dirt. Like it's hitting like my car. I'm in this little Daewoo Carlos. It's a tiny little car, like a Yeah. And I'm flicking all this dirt up, and it's hitting all the fence, and I'm nearly getting bogged. And I finally get through. I've made these big trenches in this like footpath, like grassy area. And I go pick her up, and I drive back to my house, and we sneak in the door. The religious lady's in the front room. We sneak in, and we walk back to the room, and we lie down, and we start hooking up a little bit. And all of a sudden, I had this thought: what if I accidentally touched myself? And then there was like pre-cum essentially that could make Amy pregnant. And then I touched Amy, and then now she's pregnant. And now, like, what do we do? And then I kind of panicked, like, wait, did I? And then we both lay there. So we just started hooking up, like nothing had really happened. And we're lying there freaking out that Amy had spontaneously become pregnant because I touched myself and it flew across, like something like that happened, right? So we're lying there in fear, both panic, and then we leave, get it back in the car, and I drive her home. And that was the end of that adventure. But we were terrified that we had magicked pregnancy. And that falls right into something that you experienced. I'd love if you could kick your story off a little bit with that, with my anecdote.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I think that when I first started doing interviews, I think what I was really hoping was that I was going to find somebody else who was taking pregnancy tests, though they weren't having sex. I was like, anybody else doing this? And it actually took me a while to find someone. And when I first did, I was like, oh, I'm not the only one, right? But it turns out there are a ton of us. Now I know that there are a ton of people. So I finally got to this point where I said, I'm ready to have, I'm ready, like theoretically, not in this moment, but I'm theoretically ready to have sex before marriage. And it was after I had had this moment where I doubted the literal Son of Godness of Jesus for the first time in my life, like a real genuine doubt. And I was like, nah, I'm out. Right? Like there's no saving me now, right? That's the one thing that you can never doubt, right?
Yeah.
And I started to, I think, at that point, feel a little bit more freedom to ask which of the rules I still wanted to hold on to and which of the beliefs I actually held, and et cetera, et cetera. And I remember announcing to my boyfriend that I was open to having sex before marriage. Up until that point, had no challenges around sexuality. I was very comfortable with holding the line, right? And with the the fear of something happening, keeping things very low key, right? But the minute that I, in my mind, decided that it was theoretically possible for us to have sex outside of marriage, it all just abruptly changed, right? I might have been theoretically ready for that, but emotionally, right? And in my body, most definitely not, right? So that's when I remember, we never actually had sex, but I certainly, all kinds of fears would be running through my mind, right? Like very similar sort of like, what if the pre-cum touched this thing? And like, keep in mind that we grew up in a world where we learned very messy sex ed. Like I remember someone saying when I was growing up that you could get pregnant if you were both in the same hot tub and there was sperm floating in the hot tub, right? And then it could like
escape the penis and just
yeah. But like overall, there was also just this like energy of if you do something wrong, some punishment will come. So of course pregnancy would come, right? Of course this very public expression of I have sinned would be what would come. Yeah. And I remember, I would have these panic attacks and we would have to stop making out, and my eczema, I'm the one with the eczema, right? My eczema would be coming out and I'd be scratching myself until I bled, and I was just a wreck. And then it would all end and we would do the drive home, as you said, right? It wasn't a drive home for us, but that sort of like nothing happened. And so now we have to drive home still in shame, right? And that's when I would just be like filled with anxiety. Wait a minute. Nothing happened, but what if something happened, right? Nothing happened, but what if?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I couldn't get that anxiety to go away until I took a pregnancy test. And it got to the point where I was like buying pregnancy tests in bulk because I was like, I know I'm going to have to take another pregnancy test at some point. Like I'm going to be terrified about this again later this week, right? So let me just like buy a few tests at once, right? Um yeah, and I think that's the thing, that when I would tell my secular peers, and at this point in my life I'd left evangelicalism. My boyfriend was secular, my friends were secular, I was at a secular school. And I remember when I was telling people about that in particular, right, that's the thing that made them all look at me like, now what now's happening? No, so you're doing what, right? And I remember saying to them, I'm really scared. Like, I think something's really wrong with me. And they were like, yeah, yes, something is very wrong with you. Right. And I just had absolutely no idea what it was. This was a long time ago, long before the word purity culture existed. And I just felt utterly and absolutely broken, with no sort of sign of hope anywhere. Right.
Did so how did you, like, if you could go back and give yourself advice back then, knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself?
In that particular phase of my life?
When you're kind of like having these panic attacks and the eczema.
Yeah. It's a good question. Let me think about that. Man, I think I would just say my headphone came out. I think I would just say, you're okay. Like, you're not a horrible person. You're not broken. You're not fundamentally flawed in a way that's going to make it impossible for you to ever have a meaningful relationship. You're not, you're okay, right? I think I had a lot of fear. I would say that the scariest phase for me was the phase that we're talking about right now. The scariest phase for me was not being in evangelicalism. When I was in evangelicalism, I think I perceived it as something that I had joined and could leave if I wanted to. And when I did leave and the beliefs were still controlling me in such utterly life-defining ways, right? That was the scary time, right? I had made the choice to leave. I had made the choice to say, I believe I can make this choice with my boyfriend, right? But the internalization of these teachings ran so deep that it became clear that I didn't have control, right? I couldn't make those choices. I could believe one thing and everything in me was going to scream the messages I'd been raised with and make sure that I damn well didn't do what I want to do, right? It's a really scary thing to have a disintegration between your sort of cognitive understanding of yourself and then your body, which is deeply, deeply rooted in a narrative and an understanding of the world that you don't even agree with anymore.
Yeah. It can be super wild like that. That part of my story, and I've told this a couple of times, is when Amy and I, my wife and I, eventually got back together, and this touches in your book as well. Your book is so relevant, even though it's not focused. It's mainly focused towards women. It's so relevant to me. There's so many things, but I recommend people, links in the description, go get this book. Audible, physical, both great. But I remember one time Amy and I were back going to church. I had moved back up to Queensland to kind of be with her, and I was in my father's workshop and I was working on a jewelry box for her, and I was just making her a jewelry box as like a gift, and I was woodworking and stuff, and I was like, man, life is so good. I was praying to God, and like I felt really fulfilled, and I thought to myself, I'm going to let down those walls. Like those walls that I've built up, that, you know, I went through a really rough season. I'm going to let down those walls and I'm going to go into a more intimate spot with God. You know, I put on some worship music. I stopped woodworking and I decided to start praying. Immediately as I started praying, I felt this booming voice say, break up with Amy. And I went, whoa. And I immediately pulled me right out of the zone. I vomited. I ran outside and I vomited into the garden. Same spot that I probably vomited, you know, 10 years prior with my high school girlfriend. And I was like, whoa. And I had this like panic attack. And I was like, that's bizarre. I went and spoke to pastors, and they were like, that doesn't sound right. I went and spoke to people who knew Amy and I, and they're like, Amy's bringing you closer to God, but for some reason you feel like God's telling you to break up with Amy. And I was like, this is so hard for me to deal with. And I was speaking to worship pastors, I was doing counseling, I was going to pastors, I was having lunch with pastors. I was like, every day was almost filled with seeing someone from church. We were very well connected because I used to be the youth pastor there, and so I knew all the staff. I was always going there and talking to people who knew theology. And someone told me the Bible scripture, he who finds a wife finds a good thing, and that released a lot of anxiety. It was like, oh, if I find a wife, that's good. It's not like there's someone destined for me, you know, which is what I was kind of brought up to believe. But these anxiety attacks just didn't go away, and I was panicking all the time. I got diagnosed with panic disorder. I went and saw a psychologist after my parents begged me, like, go see a secular psychologist. Like, just go see, they don't even have to be secular, just go see a psychologist, not like a counselor, not like a random like person at church. Just go see someone trained. And the first session was boring. It was like a questionnaire. And the second session, they got me to repeat out loud, what if God wants me to break up with Amy? And I was like, I can't say that. I was like, the Bible says that there's life and death in the power of the tongue, and I don't want to say that. And he's like, and I argued with him for a little while, and he's like, he convinced me to do it. So I'm saying, I'm in his office. I'm like, what if God wants to break up with Amy? And my anxiety would build. And he's like, say it again. I'm like, what if God wants to break up with Amy? And my anxiety would build. And I'll say it again. What if God wants to break up with Amy? And he's like, keep going. And I'm now panicking. I'm now looking around his office for a bin to vomit in case I just spontaneously throw up. And I'm like, I'm really panicking now. And he's like, say it again. And I'm just keep saying it. And then eventually it was like a spell broke. And it was just like, click. And it was like, what if God, what? And then all of a sudden it was like, why do I think that? And it was honestly like black magic. It was honestly like, I would have called it a spiritual experience if it happened in the context of church. But it was like, literally it just broke. And then he's like, say it again. And so I just kept saying it. And then I was almost laughing at how stupid the thought was and how silly the thought was. I was like, that's so bizarre. And turns out what I've been calling the voice of God in some instances was like a form of OCD, like a form of OCD tick, and an intrusive thought that I couldn't get rid of. And by confronting it, by staring and look, this isn't psychological advice, by the way, go see a proper psychologist, but by facing it and looking at it head on and not running from it, it just went away. And I mean, it kept coming back for a little while, but I would just repeat the phrases and they went away. And shortly after that, I had the same thing with what if I'm gay, or what if I don't realize that I'm going to spontaneously become gay, and that ruins my relationship with Amy? And the same thing, like I had to, repeat that phrase over and over again. But it's like those things, reading your book, I never realized that was connected to purity culture, because you talk in your books about so many people who panic. I actually marked one of them in the end here, who panic about, like, literally there was someone, was it Scarlet mentioned, Scarlet mentioned here, let me just read it for a second. One day I was in my anthropology class and I was feeling really weird. I started low-level shaking. I went back to my room and my heart just started beating so fast. I never felt anything like this. I couldn't stop it. The shaking took on a greater rising, and then I remembered I tried to stand up and I fell to the ground. I thought I was having a heart attack. I really thought that I might be having a heart attack. I called one of my closest friends. He ran over to the apartment and took me to, I can't remember, but I ended up at the hospital. The doctor gave me Valium, which made my body be like Scarlett made the sound of a robot shutting down, collapsing her body into a heap on her lap. The doctor was a Greek woman who I really liked. Scarlett continued. Sorry, I'm not a very good reader. She asked, "Can you tell me what you think brought this on?" I said, "I think I'm not supposed to be with my boyfriend. I recognize how embarrassing that it was, that was to say when I was in the hospital, but I really thought that's what brought it on." And I was like, I can relate to that so much.
Yeah. And then the next thing that Greek doctor says is like, "Did you grow up in the church?" or something like that, right? Or are you thinking about having sex before marriage or something like that? And I was like, I remember when Scarlett told me that story, being like, man, so that doctor had seen this before. Like that doctor had seen people come in with panic attacks because of sexual activity before, right? And these things have been happening for a long time and we haven't been talking about them. Yeah. What a story. I'm so glad you shared that. And I'm also so glad that you found such an excellent psychiatrist. It sounds like that person was incredibly helpful. Yeah, and I got to tell you, both the break up with this person message is one that a lot of people hear. I heard that. You remember when I was in high school, I felt like God was telling me to break up with my boyfriend. Not a booming voice, but like I felt like I got the message. Yeah. I got the message nonetheless. And what was the other thought that you had? The
what if I'm gay
what
and
if
don't
I'm
realize
gay?
it?
Yeah. So that's also something that and specifically people I know who have had that thought have also struggled with OCD, but the OCD attaches to these religious ideas, like these horrific taboos within religion are like, you're going to be with the wrong person, you're going to be gay, you're going to be trans. One person I talked to, they were afraid they were trans, and then once they started to treat their OCD, they were like, I don't know why I thought that, I'm not. But it's like these are within purity culture, these are like the end of the world, right? We learned that this is like, these are horrific things to be afraid of, right?
I thought I would rather, like, there was times when I was like, I wasn't suicidal or anything, but I was like, I used to get a lot of comfort thinking that one day I could die. Like I was just like, I can't do this anymore. Like it was really rough. Like, and it's so funny because like what I was afraid of is that like that Amy and I weren't supposed to be together, or that like I was going to spontaneously, or that I'm not attracted to women, I'm attracted to men, but don't realize it. And like, I'm like, it's like I was a psychologist. I was like, I don't want to, like, it's like, I'm not gay, I'm not attracted to men, but like, what if I am? And then I'll have to like, I don't want to go dancing and like meet dudes and like I don't want to do, and it's like, but you're not, and it's like, I know I'm not, but it's like, I can't, and it gets like really, really like your brain is like, this is ridiculous. Like it's horrible. And I have a friend who's she's got OCD. She's gay. She has the same things about being straight. So she's like, what if I'm straight? What if I'm not actually gay? And she's like, has the same problem, but in reverse.
Interesting.
And she grew up in purity culture and stuff. So it's like, I wonder like how much purity culture is like behind a lot of this stuff. Like it just attaches to the type of brain that, I have. And, some people go through purity culture and they're fine, but others, like, it really harms them, right?
Yes. And I mean, and that has to do with so many things, right? Like it has to do, I do think that there's huge interactions with mental health stuff. I do think that there's also huge interactions with trauma, capital T and lowercase t trauma. And I also think it has to do with how much your religion shaped your identity, like your sense of yourself. Like the research shows that the things that make religious sexual messaging more likely to impact you are your gender, and there's another thing that I'm missing, and then the degree to which it's your identity. So someone who like goes to the evangelical church, but it's like, I'm primarily a soccer player, right? In their mind, right? They're not going to be impacted as much as someone who's like, within the first sentence, when someone asks who I am, I got to get in evangelical, or well, you would say Christian, right? Because that is such a core part of my identity. And if it's really core to your identity, then the teachings take on a greater prevalence. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of intersections. And I feel like one of the things that's also comes up a lot is that, so religion, a lot of psychologists see religion as extended family. So you've got your like immediate family, like your actual family of origin, and then you've got an extended family, your religious family outside of that. And if you have a household that has stuff going on that is dysfunctional, abusive even, etc., it is often reiterated and even like given theological frames by the extended family of religion, because evangelicalism, or any culture that's teaching purity culture, is going to be deeply patriarchal, deeply controlling, squashing, like going back to what we talked about at the beginning, squashing your real thoughts and feelings, inserting the kinds of thoughts and feelings you're supposed to be having, pulling away choice, exercising these like overarching controls over your life that make, if you grew up in a home that has those things going on, and then you grow up in a church that's like, yes, that's what it is to be a good and healthy, family. And that's what it is. Like the way in which you are trying to cope with it is actually what good womanhood looks like, and, et cetera. Like, so I feel like the ways in which these things show up in people's lives, and the degree to which people are impacted by it, it just depends on so much stuff, right? Like for everything from your family to your mental health to your other experiences to your identity. It's a mess, right? But it's really important that people recognize, because I think those people who did grow up in purity culture and feel that they weren't harmed, which I'm not totally convinced that all of them are in touch with that part of themselves, right? Because there are plenty of people who have come to me and been like, I thought I wasn't harmed. And then one day I was like, wait a minute, what is this thing that I've been ignoring my whole life? And that is the key to all of these things, right? But it's important, I think, for people to understand, that it can, it can have really deep and dangerous impacts, and even suicidal impacts, right?
Hugely. I actually am so proud of my wife in that when we first got married, I would like watch movies in bed on my laptop with like the screen at full brightness and like just no headphones or anything. And she just put up with it. I didn't realize she just put up with it because she just thought, oh, I just have to submit or whatever. And now it's so annoying, but I'm proud of her. But like I have to like turn the brightness. If I want to watch anything, I have to turn the brightness right down. I have to put my headphones in. I have to like cover the screen a little bit. And then even I'll get tap on the back like, can you turn it down even brighter, like even less? And I'm like, this is great. Like it's great that you feel free to do this, but it's so annoying. Sometimes I've slept in my office when I've got like huge workloads because I don't want to get waken up by our son or something, and I just have to have the laptop open. I'm like, this is great. This is like being a kid again. I can watch
yes.
But so you finished the book stating that you're a type of Christian that was you're not evangelical, but you're definitely an interesting or a different type of Christian that you would sometimes worship in your apartment and annoy your neighbors, and you'd have a quiet place and things like that. I noticed, I looked it up, at least in the Australian Christian bookstore, Kurong. I'm not sure if that's everywhere around the world, but that's where we got like Christian books. I noticed that your book doesn't show up, and I was wondering, does your book have a Christian audience, or has the book and yourself, because it's quite a fair book. It's not, you're not saying Christianity bad or anything. You're just kind of giving some real world examples of how some parts of the evangelical movement have been damaging to people, and just raw interviews essentially. Have you found that the churches ostracized your message a little bit, or have you had any experiences like that, or have you found that there's only some churches, or have you found it being pretty accepted overall?
Well, it's a good question. I don't think my audience is churches. I don't think my audience is evangelical churches. The people It's interesting. The people who are listening and reading my book are either in a church, but they're questioning, right? Or maybe they're in the church, but they're like, oh, there's some aspects of it that aren't working for me, which already is meaning that they're kind of fringe, right? If they're asking those kinds of questions, right?
Yeah.
Even if they're central, and they might appear to be central in their mind, they're pushing to the edge, right? But in order to really look meaningfully at purity culture and to say, the not just the tone, not just the particular language, et cetera, but really the heart of this message is deeply, deeply problematic and needs to be, torn down to the ground and rebuilt from the ground up. If you want to if you want to stand by that, or even read a book that talks about that, you can't be too comfortable in evangelicalism. So I find that my audience is primarily people who are on the fringe, or people who are actually have left, and are not necessarily people who are in the church, which is interesting, right? Because I did attempt to be really fair, and to really focus on purity culture as much as possible, and not, go much further into the many, many other problematic aspects of the culture. But there's a, that still is still too taboo for a church audience. But I had hoped that I would be able to have an inroad within the church, so that there would be some real awakening within the church. But that was, I think that was overly optimistic about what the church was willing to do.
So can you go into a little bit about how your faith developed through the writing process of, what was it, 15 or 16 years from when you kind of started doing your research, 12 years of interviews, or 2 years or something of writing, like however long it was.
Yeah.
How did your faith develop? And then after that, since the book has come out, how has your belief system developed?
Yeah, well, so I mean, it has been 19 years since I started doing interviews at this point.
Wow.
That is out of control.
Wow.
I shouldn't have said in the book 12 years. I should have said a date. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because it's yeah.
It keeps changing, right?
Yeah. Because I heard
I
some interviews, and then I was like, wait, that, because I was doing research on you. I was like,
wait, what are
years, 15 years?
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, time keeps ticking, right? And I did the research for 12 years. And then what I ended up doing was I did the research for 12 years. And then I think my memory is then when I got the book deal, I recontacted everybody, and those who wanted to, I re-interviewed, and those are the ones I used for the book. Right. So even within and then their book takes a couple of years. So anyway, so there was a lot of time. I mean, it's evolved a lot over the years. When I first left evangelicalism, I left church altogether. Though I think I still had a very Christian understanding of God, and I was still, eventually found my way back to praying, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that then over the years, sort of getting closer to the time of writing the book, I started to work in religious reform. So I started to work with the world's major religious traditions who were doing gender and sexual reform internally. So the most progressive people within these various religious expressions. And that was a really eye-opening experience for me, because it really showed me that there are, many, many Christianities, many, all religions, right? There are many expressions of them. And some of them are dope, right? And deeply justice based, and really trying to do some really important healing work, and succeeding in many cases. And so I think that's when I started to feel okay, maybe there could be a Christianity that I would realign with, right? And when the book was coming out, I was in a moment where I was more aligned with the church, theoretically, than going to church itself, right? I didn't go to church myself, but I still felt very strongly like a cultural Christian. Like it informed how I looked at everything. And I was a deeply spiritual person, and Christianity was still the primary frame for my spirituality. Do you know what I mean? I feel like as the years have gone on, Christianity becomes less of the frame for my spirituality. Like I'm still a very spiritual person. And I'm not using the Christian language to access it the way that I once was, right? You know, one of the things that when I have folks who I'm working with who want to hold on to spirituality or religion or faith or whatever they want to be holding on to, one of the things that we do is we, and this is not something I do with everyone, right? Because a lot of people are like, I don't want to touch religion with a 10-foot pole. But if somebody does want to hold on to those things, one of the things we'll do is be like, you know, what is a term that doesn't hold all the baggage for you, right? And maybe that term is love, right? Or maybe that term is higher power, or maybe that term is Sophia, right? You know, like wisdom, right? Maybe that term is, you know, it could be any number of things, right? And can we learn to connect to something that is beyond our understanding without the frame of Christianity that has harmed us so much, right? And that's more where I find myself these days.
Okay. So how, do you mind if I ask you how, like, you engage in your spirituality? Is it still prayer, meditation, kind of like those quiet moments? Or is it, or are you still singing praises? Like, you're still singing like Shout to the Lord by Darlene Zschech? Oh, I've got her name, but Hillsong. Are you still singing like those songs, and like, are you still engaging, or is it kind of like a feeling that you kind of engage with?
Well, you know, I don't know. I mean, first of all, I haven't sung praise songs in a quadrillion years. When I think in the book, what I was describing, I don't know if I explained it, how I explained it in the book, but what I was doing at that point was these sort of I would sing a question, and I would sing the question over and over and over and over, and I would sing my way into an answer. Right. So it was a form of singing meditation. Do you know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
So it would be like like going into the zone where you lose your conscious self, and then you connect to your subconscious, God, whatever you want to call it. And, you know, and something appears, right? It's very similar to like, you know, meditation where you're like, you know, I'm going to bring this question to love and be like, you know, what if God wants me to break up with Amy? How would love answer that? Right. You know, like, or what have you. Right. Yeah. Oh, my computer's, I just don't want it to die on us. Give me just a second.
Oh yeah. That would be upsetting.
We would be sad.
Yeah. Just like it just ends.
Yeah.
Probably.
So I don't remember how I described it in the book, but it was real esoteric stuff that I was doing with the music. Right. It was like, was like a form of like trying to get beyond the conscious mind, right? And trying to get to the subconscious, the spiritual, the unknown, whatever it is that holds a deeper wisdom than what I could hold, right? So I would say I still do various forms of that, right? So that might mean like, you know, journaling back and forth until I kind of get past my conscious mind, right? You know, with love or whatever, you know, whatever frame my own deepest wisdom, my true self, whatever it is, right? I'm more likely to use phrases like that. Sophia, I like the phrase Sophia. You know, so I'll do, you know, that is one form. I haven't done the singing one in a while, but that's mostly because I have a little one, as you know, and I just don't have the kind of time to do that. But, you know, meditation, right. Other forms, but really what I'm trying to do is like, you know, to bring it back to what you talked about that, like letting go. It's what my mom, again, experiences, I think, when she's in that little sliver of space that is hers. Right. You know, that's what I I find that the spiritual practice looks like for me these days is like finding spaces in which I can be in my own energy and and um and trying to get past the part of me that's like, you got to do this and don't forget to do that, and and then what's that person thinking about you, and like, all that crap, right? And getting to what is real, which I think for me still means more than just what is in me. Like for me, there is still, I still hold a belief that there is more beyond me, that it intermingles with whatever is inside of me, right? And that I can access it when I drop the shit, right? So I don't know. Was that a good answer? Does that make sense?
It's hard to verbal. You probably have never even like sat down to think like, what do like verbalize exactly?
Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, so you're catching it raw.
Yeah. So no, but so that was perfect answer, because I think that a big criticism I have of well, it's not a criticism actually. I don't know what it is, but yeah, it is a criticism, I guess. But the left community that I'm a part of, or like not the left community, the atheist community that I'm a part of, is very much intellectual. It's very much, what does the Bible say? What, how can we justify this? Is this a rational thought process? But I think that if you were to just live life like that, you're missing like one half of the human experience. I think that ritual is important. I think art is important. I think they use just different parts of the brain. You're not going to look at a piece of art. Well, you can look at a piece of art and use theory to determine whether or not it's a good piece of art or something, but it comes from a different spot in the human condition, I think.
That's right.
And I think things like ritual, like I've had spiritual experiences and things like that, quote unquote spiritual experiences. I don't personally attach a truth claim to them. So when someone meditates and they have a profound experience, or they take psychedelics and they have a profound experience, I don't believe that when someone takes psychedelics, they actually went to another plane of existence. And when they were speaking to deities, they were the creators of the universe or whatever. They had that experience, and that was very, very real to them. But I don't necessarily attach a truth claim to that. But I don't think that that's necessarily, but I still think there's something there. I still think that we need to have rituals. Like I tell this story, so I've told this story probably 10 times on Deep Drinks, but one of my when we first went to Bali, I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, because it's a Hindu island, and I was like, I wanted to learn about Hinduism, so I was listening to the Bhagavad Gita. I had like a bunch of cocktails. I'm poolside, there's techno blaring in the background, like, and my wife's next to me, and we're just chilling there in the sun, and I'm listening to like and Arjuna said to, I'm listening to the Bhagavad Gita, and we got to chapter 9, and it was like this profound, it sounded like something straight out of Psalms or Ezekiel. It's like, I am the wood and the fire that consumes it. I am the beginning. I am the end. I am the Alpha and the Omega. And it was like Krishna, I think it was Krishna, talking to Arjuna, it's been a while, about who he is. And it was like this very and I was like, whoa. And it was like this very this awe moment. But I don't believe in the Hindu gods. I don't believe that it's actually real, but I believe it's touching something. It's like it's touching this primal, this you can read beautiful poetry or look up at the stars and you have this feeling. And I get that from ritual. I get that. I interviewed someone, Biddy Buddha, who is I think the term she uses is ritual agnosticism, where she's not a believer in any type of religion, but she really loves the rituals around like crystals, tarot cards. She you see her, she'd look like, she's got dreadlocks and she wears all the pendant, and she wears things, and she has the statues, and it's and she really finds a lot of enjoyment, and it removes her nihilism, but she doesn't actually think that there is something, I guess, behind them on a greater level. She kind of it's almost like playing make-believe in a way, but not really. It's like you touch those things with your emotions, not with your intellect, if that makes sense. But you use them as tools. I wonder what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that maybe what I'm hearing, what I sort of identify with is using them as tools, as you said, and not always knowing what is true and what is not true, and not always caring what is true and what is not true, and trusting that something is true, and that the
Yeah.
outreach is worth something, right?
Mm.
So like, yeah, so I'll use deities from other religions if it feels useful. Like if I'm specifically thinking about obstacles, I don't mind, pulling in Ganesh, right? Like, but it's not because I believe in Ganesh, right? But like there is something about the energy
Yeah.
of like, I'm working through some obstacles right now, right? There's something about like the play of it, of whether it's cards or whatever it is, there's a degree of like play to it that I hear in what you're describing from your previous guest. But I think that there's also a degree of like like not knowingness, right? Like, maybe all of this is untrue and maybe all of this is deeply true. But either way, I trust that it's worth the effort, and that something is catching me. And if it's like my own deep true self, and if it's, something larger than outside of myself, like, I don't fully know the answer to that question. I lean toward it being both, right? But I don't know the answer to that question. But it feels worth the effort. Do you know what I mean? To attempt to engage. Like that is what religion really is. None of us, in my perspective, none of us knows anything, right? We're all just reaching. And sometimes we get, little images of something that seems real. And, we might form a religion around it, right? For me, what I think is really important, and this kind of goes back to your story about the hearing the voice of God telling you to break up with Amy. For me, one thing that I talk about with clients a lot is touch in to what you feel when the thing comes up. And if what you feel is terror and judgment and shame and that's not, insert the word that you use, love, Sophia, my own inner wisdom, whatever it is, right? If the feeling is like peace and calm and you're okay, right? That, aligns with your picture of love or whatever. This is one of the reasons why we pull out these words, right? And we stop using the words that have a lot of dogma attached to them, because the word God for a lot of people has all of it. Like it has the like you're okay and the like you are not okay, right? And so, so if you have a word like that holds both of these messages, then you can't tell when the voice is telling you you're awful and you're going to hell, if that's God, any more or less than when the voice says you're beautiful and I love you just the way you are, right? So that's why coming up with new language can be useful, so that you can be like, what I'm really like, what I'm really attached to and love about this religion, spiritual space that I'm engaging with is the like real deep wisdom, not the shaming stuff, right? So what are you feeling when you hear that voice, right? What are you feeling when something comes up that that you feel like, is this something bigger than myself? If you're feeling self-hatred, it ain't any God I want to have anything to do with.
Yeah. I mean, it's so complex, isn't it? Because it gets into your perspective of like the way that you view God. I had a love interest ask me when I was in church, do you view God as like up there on a throne or like a best friend here on earth? And I was just like, both. But like I think a lot of, but like she definitely didn't see God as like up there on the throne. But I was like, we need to make sure we're doing the will of God, like it was like I had that very much like John Bevere, I don't know if you know him, like driven by eternity, the bait of Satan is offense and all that kind of stuff. Like be protective of your faith. It's interesting how the advice that I always give myself is just to enjoy your life, like enjoy, like wherever you're at, like just enjoy it. Like don't take things so seriously, because like my beliefs have changed like crazy, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Also, yes, like everything that we're saying is like straight up sacrilege from the communities in which we, come. Like this is, all the things that we were told are dangerous, right? I can hear all the if you've got anyone who's still impacted by those worlds, I can hear all the narratives of like, what's coming up in people's minds as they hear this.
Yeah.
Picking and choosing and all the stuff, right?
So we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to ask some questions of you for some advice for people. But before we do that, I want to just quickly break the ice with a video that I found on TikTok that I just thought I would get your commentary on. So this is the video. Let me know if you can't hear it, but here we go.
That I believe, and I've seen thousands at this point, thousands. I wrote a book called Moral Revolutions. I've seen thousands of people's virginity restored. I have hundreds of emails about girls' hymens being restored. Hundreds. Yeah, it's not typically something you tell your pastor. By the way, I had a creative miracle. Really? Awesome. What happened? God restored my hymen.
And I did mention that I was going to be showing a clip like this before we started, and it's humorous, but you had a bit of a different take on it in the pre-interview. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, hymen is like a whole other thing, right? To like restore one's hymen. That's like, that's, yeah.
And that's virginity.
I mean, right. Yes. I mean, it's so complicated because, now that I've watched the clip, I also have some other thoughts, right? But this idea of like, it is a practice around the world to sew women's, vaginas tighter. You know what I mean? Like there is this sort of like re-virgination for men's pleasure and to prove that a woman has not sinned, like the hymen, right? Like we're talking about like sheets with blood on it, right? Like there's something real like deep about re-virgination that feels very problematic. But when you said you were going to watch it, we were going to show a video about re-virgination. When I let my dog come in here, I did not know he was going to be itching the entire time.
That's fine.
I'm so sorry, but it is such a prominent part of our interview. But what I brought up was, there's also this whole like re-virgination movement, which is probably what this guy that you showed, is involved in. And the re-virgination movement is like, it's complex because it is both for women, primarily women who grew up in purity culture and feel like a deep amount of shame, and they can feel like they can be re-virginized and kind of like get back a little bit of that sense of like worth, which is just a heartbreaking notion, right? But then there's also right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, and many people believe that, which is why women have their vaginas sewn tighter, right? Because
I thought that was a joke. The tell the doctor to put in an extra stitch. I thought that was a joke. I didn't realize it actually happened.
It happens. Yeah, it happens. Yeah, globally. But anyway, so this is. But then there's also a lot of survivors of rape who grow up in the church movement, who go through a re-virgination process, and maybe who don't, grow up in the church, right? There's something about, for people who are attached to the concept of virginity, right, to have that sort of like taken from them, is a horrific thing, right? And so there's this. So the re-virgination movement is complex in that sense, right? Like it gives people a sense of people who feel like they've lost their worth, some sense of worth, which is meaningful. But of course, that's based on a rubric where your worth is based on your virginity, right? Which is part of the patriarchal world we live in, and I'm speaking specifically from women's perspective. I understand it is a value for men too. But for women, of course, it's like, it defines who you are, like your worth, right? Anyway, yes. So So there's just so much. It brings up so much.
It does. What advice would you give to someone who, well, first of all, someone who's been very damaged by purity culture, and secondly, do you have advice for someone who has maybe been in a higher control or domestic violence situation and is many years later now struggling still to find relationships or to let themselves open up sexually with someone again, maybe someone who has experienced sexual violence? Do you have advice for those people?
Whew.
Sorry to end on such a big question.
Yeah. I mean, let me hold the second question first. I mean, I think what I would first say is that, you are not alone. For people who are raised in purity culture, I find that there is a sense that we have to accept whatever is given to us and whatever comes to us, right? I think of narratives like God is teaching you a lesson, just, you do the right thing and then everything will work out. There's so much that makes us, I think, particularly as women in toxic environments, whether they're toxic relationships, toxic work environments, toxic friendships, when we're raised in purity culture to withstand toxicity, right? That makes us feel like this is just what it is. There's no escape. There's no getting out. There's no changing things. I just have to be stronger. I have to pray harder. I have to, whatever the case may be, right? And so I think the first thing I would say is that, you're so not alone, and that narrative is one that was taught to you and is not true, right? You don't have to stay. You don't have to accept. You don't have to, etc. Right? Like that's just one frame of the world that was handed to you. And it's one that probably has gotten really, really, really deep inside. And you're not alone in struggling with releasing it, but it's possible, right? It's possible. Our neural pathways were deeply, deeply shaped during important developmental phases of our lives. And so it takes a lot of time as an adult to reshape our brain, right? But we can do it. So hold on, find support, right? And know that you're not alone in the experience, and you're not alone in your finding your way out of the experience. It'll probably be my advice for anyone, right? Who's struggling with these things. I feel like the there's so much. Maybe what I'll say is this. I feel like the recovery process is two parts. It's it's the deconstruction of all the stuff that we learned that's deeply problematic. And that hurts, and it's hard, and it's painful, and it comes with loss of relationships, loss of identity, loss of purpose, all kinds of loss. It sucks in a lot of ways. But then there's this other process that is the reconstruction of the self and the rebuilding of a life that actually aligns with what you feel and what you need and what you desire, and all kinds of other things that feels amazing. Like it feels incredible to make a choice for yourself. Like I think about, when Amy went from staying up and being bothered by your TV screen all night to when she was like, I'm going to start telling him to turn down the I'll bet it feels amazing for her to sleep. You know what I mean? Like it feels great to do something that's good, that actually serves you, right? So,
I don't like it.
so
I want her
I know
to
not
submit.
for you so much,
No,
but
I'm kidding.
But my point is you have to do them both at the same time. Like in order to do the deconstruction, you have to also be doing the reconstruction, learning how to live out of your own heart and out of your own mind, and et cetera, because when you do, it actually feels so good that it allows you to keep on doing the hard work of pulling it all apart. So there is there is joy on the other side, is I guess what I'm trying to say, right? There is like sleeping through the night on the other side, right?
Yeah. What about someone who's gone through like the like domestic violence or that kind of like hard trauma? Is there anything specific that you kind of discover that helps people kind of move past those past experiences in your coaching?
I mean, it depends on where you're at with it, right? You know, but I think again, I would go back to this idea of like pulling apart the narratives that told you that you have to be there and you have to, somehow you deserve it. Somehow you have to withstand it. You have to learn your lesson from, God or whatever the case may be. Those stories need to be deconstructed. Like we need to identify those stories and pull them apart and look at who they serve and identify them beyond, like we just accept them in our bodies as true. And even if theoretically we might understand they're not, if we don't really do the work to fully deconstruct them and where those messages came from, et cetera, like, they're still convincing within ourselves, right? So there is the work of like pulling apart the nitty gritty, right? Like what made me have it not occur to me that I could stand up and walk out of the room that day? Do you know what I mean? Like what? Yeah. That's interesting that I did not even realize that I could have done that, right? Like what's going on inside of me and what are the narratives and what are the stories and where did I learn them and what are the things I've seen in my life? Like there's so much there that goes beyond purity culture, of course, with a lot of these things. Like I said, we're talking about family and extended family, right? And I mean that literally as family, and also family can represent a whole lot of different things, experience and theology experience. So it's almost like you have like concentric circles, like you have the core of something, a trauma that happened to you, a family abuse, a toxic family, a, whatever. And then you have a theology that's deeply problematic that becomes this concentric circle around it that just like pushes in on it and makes it solid, right? And makes it even harder to see for what it is, right? It's, so it really requires unpacking, like really getting air, and then simultaneously, that work of finding like what actually feels amazing, right? Like, which is feeling your own feelings, actually being safe enough in your body that you can experience what you're feeling, that what your body is feeling, right? For many of us, our bodies are not safe enough to even feel, right? These things are kind of the first steps of rebuilding your life in a way that starts with you. It's like how do you get to you, right? And then, once you've gotten to you enough that you have a sense of, okay, I actually know what I want, and I actually, at least one sliver of what I want, right? Learning how to make choices that align with it, which is, feels so good, right? But this is deep stuff, right?
Well, deep drinks, right? This is what we do.
Right.
But what I'm hearing into a lot is to look at your experience with compassion. It's to like, why did I do this? Why, and not to judge yourself, not to why did I stay in that relationship? Why did I freak out when I was a teenager? Like, look at it with compassion and go like, that's interesting.
Absolutely.
Let's explore that. Why did I feel like that? And I think that's really important. Well, Linda, thank you so much for coming on. I don't want to keep you over time, so I do want to shout out your book is linked in the description. Pure, I absolutely recommend it. It is a really easy read from it's not technical or anything, but it's also like it made me laugh, it made me cry. Well, maybe tear up at least. laugh, maybe tear up. I got angry, I got happy, I felt relief. Like it's you feel a lot of stuff when you read this. And of course, could you just share with everyone some of you about your coaching and like what you do there?
Yeah. I mean, you're getting a little bit of a sense of it from this conversation, right? I work with people who were raised in purity culture, and sometimes that looks like evangelicalism, and most of the time it looks like evangelicalism, but not always, other forms of purity culture as well. And we do work around this reconstruction and the deconstruction that has to happen simultaneously, right? And that sort of reordering of your life, and that includes your relationships and your sexuality and your gender, but also includes everything else. How do you actually start out of an alignment with yourself? So yeah, that's what we do.
Awesome. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on, Linda. Is there anything else you want to say before we kind of wrap up the interview?
No, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it. This is what I would also say for anybody who's listening, who's going through a really hard time right now. You are worthy of help, and you are worthy of asking for help. And maybe that doesn't look like reaching out to someone like me. Maybe that looks like reaching out to a friend who will actually hear you, or reaching out to a therapist or what have you. But another thing that we often learn is that to expose that we need help is to expose that we're not good enough, right? Like, you're supposed to have all the answers. You're supposed to, if you say you don't know something or you need help, then you haven't prayed enough, and you haven't accepted God's will for your life, or you haven't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So just urging people, to know that you are worth help, and that you are worth asking for help.
That's fantastic. Great advice. Thank you so much. You can stay in the back room if you want, and we can chat just briefly afterwards. But thank you everyone for coming out. This has been wonderful. Go check out the links all in the description, and look forward to the next episode. We've got Not So Erudite coming on. We've got Derek Lambert of Myth Vision Podcast. We've got the 100th episode of Deep Drinks coming up, and we also have some exciting guests for next year, including I know will be a heated conversation between myself and Inspiring Philosophy about the benefits of the societal benefits, pros and cons of religion. So a friendly, heated discussion. So that'll be great. So see you guys later, and keep thinking deeply.